Good evening. I'm Jennifer Rabb, and I have the great privilege of serving as the president of Hunter College, where the American dream still comes true. We are proud to host the Ted Keel Public Programs at Hunter College, as we are one of the busiest commuter schools in the country. We are a place where education and transportation go hand in hand, and a place proud to host events inspired by the late Ted Keel and made possible by his extraordinary family. It is a genuine pleasure to have so many of you on Zoom tonight for a program that exemplifies the mission and the traditions of this vital part of Hunter College, the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute. As many of you know, Roosevelt House served for 25 years as a New York City home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt from 1908 until they left for Washington for FDR's first presidential inauguration. It was built for them as a wedding present from FDR's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, and it came with only one stipulation. Sarah would live in the adjoining townhouse. We like to call it the first New Deal. That did not stop Eleanor from launching herself as an independent woman. In fact, her mother-in-law issues may have encouraged her to leave the building as often as possible. But Roosevelt House is also where Franklin was brought to recover from polio, here rather than Hyde Park. And that was because the house featured one might call a small miracle of transportation, a rarity on New York homes of the day, an elevator. Later, this house served between November 1932 and March 1933 as the transition headquarters for the incoming Roosevelt administration, and the room where it happened for the creation of the actual New Deal. It was in his modest library upstairs that FDR and his brain trust began exploring the ideas that would soon lift the country out of the Great Depression. Right here in our library, FDR and his incoming Secretary of Labor, Frances Perkins, the first woman ever to serve in a cabinet, agreed to expand a program they had launched statewide in Albany, old age pensions, which of course became the phenomenal Social Security program. Amidst the other revolutionary innovations conceived beneath this roof, including minimum wage and child labor laws, was a blueprint for what we now call infrastructure, the idea of putting people to work while extending and preserving the transportation spine of the nation. Here in New York alone, the achievements of both the WPA and PWA included LaGuardia Airport and the Triborough Bridge, but also tearing down the 6th Avenue L, creating the F line, and constructing new subway stations under 6th Avenue from Delancey Street all the way to Rockefeller Center, and not to mention a new building for Hunter College itself, dedicated by none other than President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But while the New Deal set the bar for what a committed government can accomplish, the fact is that these transportation projects got completed so long ago, some of them now fill the list of upgrades we so urgently need today. Ted would be proud that some of the funds from the recently passed infrastructure program will go to upgrade the systems built under the New Deal. That's the kind of urban planning that our Ted Keel program and its wonderful Keel Fellows have been directing our gifted students to explore and address for the last 3 years. Before I talk about this year's Keel program, its leader, and tonight's conversation, let me say a few words about the larger-than-life New Yorker whose accomplishments and vision animate everything we do here tonight and throughout the year, the great Theodore W. Keel. Ted, as everyone called him, served as counselor to several presidents, but Roosevelt was the very first he served as a rising young lawyer. He went on to become not only one of New York's most successful attorneys, but a legendary labor mediator. Whether you were a mayor engaged in tough negotiations with a municipal union or a newspaper publisher stuck in a protracted strike, Ted Keel was the trusted peacemaker. His interests and achievements extended to a wide array of causes, including, of course, transportation. As early as 1965, more than 5 decades ago, Ted was already advocating for higher bridge tolls to hold down mass transit fares. A ride cost 15 cents back then, I might add, a concept that Robert Moses immediately condemned as illegal. But the city's newspaper praised the plan, and Mayor-elect John Lindsay endorsed it, And soon came the new MTA and the introduction of precisely the subsidies Ted had proposed. It's just mind-boggling that this one civic leader had the vision so early in the day to grasp the crucial importance of mass transit and the tremendous need for regional oversight. And let's not forget that from the beginning of his career, Ted was also deeply concerned about what he called the fundamental conflict between development and the environment. That inspired him to establish the Institute for Sustainable Cities, which I am so proud to say is housed here at Hunter College. And it moved Ted to create the Nurture Nature Foundation to promote environmentally sensitive development. Today, the foundation is led by his son, Robert Keel, who follows in his father's footsteps as a super lawyer, gifted mediator, and vigorous defender of the environment. We're delighted to welcome Bob Keel today and his sister, Jane Keel Stanley, to this Zoom event. Thanks so much to the Keel's family's commitment to sustainability. This Keel Fellowship in Transportation Policy was created and continues to thrive with great impact here at Roosevelt House at Hunter College. Thank you, Bob and Jane, for your confidence in Hunter to advance your father's vision to a new generation of passionate, well-educated urban affairs and public policy students at Hunter. We are sure that among the leaders destined to help shape New York transportation policy in the future will be alumni of the Keel Transportation Program at Roosevelt House. Since we launched the program, our Keel Fellows have included Gridlock Sam himself, Sam Schwartz, followed by our former New York State Director of Operations, Howard Glazer, and then Charles Kamenoff, one of the architects of the state's new congesting pricing law. Thanks to Charles, during his first semester as Keel Fellow, our students had front row seats for true policy transformation in real time as the legislature explored congestion pricing for the first time. That's why we were particularly excited when Charles agreed to come back for a second stint as Keel Fellow, conducting a seminar on transportation policy and to focus this public program on the vital issue of traffic safety. Charlie is an expert, an analyst, and an economist of both transportation and environmental public policy, a longtime advocate for bikes, mass transit, fair tolling, and traffic safety. In his work these past few years on congestion pricing, he helped bring to fruition the movement to balance traffic pricing with transit investment, the idea first championed decades ago by Ted Keel. Tonight, Charlie could easily have curated a public program on congestion pricing, but like Ted Keel, he doesn't like to rest on his laurels. Even in mission accomplished mode, he always has his eye on the next complex issue that needs tackling. And for Charlie, that issue is traffic safety and the path to protect pedestrians, bikers, and all those who use our increasingly congested streets to travel to stores, schools, and all that the city has to offer. Thank you, Charlie, for your teaching and your public outreach, and for assembling this evening's terrific panel. Let me introduce them now. Marco Connor DeCoy is the Deputy Director of Transportation Alternatives and its longtime Chief Advocate for Traffic Safety and Justice. Nicole Gelinas is a Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a columnist for the New York Post who writes on policing, traffic safety, and transportation. And Kim Royster is Chief of Transportation and the head of the NYPD Transportation Bureau, making her the city's top official responsible for policing and transportation. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's signature event. You all have extraordinary resumes which are available in the chat, and I hope our audience will read more about your accomplishments. We're so pleased to have you with us tonight. I also want to thank Harold Holzer, our Jonathan Fenton Director of Roosevelt House, for his commitment to the Ted Keel program at Roosevelt House. Harold, you help us keep Ted's spirit alive, and we're very grateful. Let me now welcome Charles Kamenoff to the Zoom to take over for this phenomenal panel tonight. Thank you to our Theodore W. Keel Fellow in Transportation Policy at Roosevelt House, transport economist and environmental activist, Charles Kamenoff. Thank you, Charlie.
President Raab, thank you so much for your inspiring and illuminating words. You've taken all of us back suitably to the dawn of the New Deal. You've taken me back personally, remembering how as a high school student in the early 60s, I would read about Ted Keel in the New York Times. And then 45 years later, was able to be affiliated with him in his push for congestion pricing. It's an honor beyond words for me to be able to, as you said, for the second time, be teaching a wonderful group of students who do truly represent New York City in all of its lustrous diversity. Thank you so much. I'd like our panelists to video themselves, and you can also unmute so everybody can see you. Thank you. And let's get going. In recent weeks, I've talked to dozens of New Yorkers to find out what they want this forum to ask and answer. And overwhelmingly, the response has been, ask the panelists why New York can't have policing that cares about protecting them from dangerous driving, policing that will make our streets safer for all. Note my phrasing, not just policing that protects us, but policing that cares about protecting us. There's a widespread feeling that our police, from rank and file to commanders and up to the top brass, don't get what we mean when we say we feel vulnerable on our streets. We have the perfect panel to speak to that. Marco Conner-Diacqua is Deputy Director at Transportation Alternatives, as President Raab said, where Marco oversees TransAlt's work in law, policing, and public policy. Nicole Gelinas is all those impressive things that President Raab pointed out, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, contributing editor at the Institute's City Journal, columnist at the Post, and perhaps the hardest to typecast working journalist in New York City. Last, and you better believe not least, we have the city's top official responsible for policing and transportation, the NYPD's Chief of Transportation, Kim Royster. We are especially grateful to Chief Royster for making herself available during this historic week as the NYPD and all New Yorkers salute and welcome incoming and ceiling-shattering Police Commissioner Keechant Sewell. Let's begin by asking our panelists what it will take to identify the most dangerous drivers, like the repeated speeder, 91 camera-issued speeding tickets since 2017, who in September caused a chain reaction crash that killed 3-month-old baby Apolline on Gates Avenue in Fort Greene. Why aren't we identifying the most reckless drivers and getting them off the streets before they cause grievous harm? Marco, we'll begin with you, then go to Nicole, and then Chief Royster.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm very happy to be here with you, with Nicole and Chief Royster here at the Roosevelt House. So I think just immediately to your question, Charlie, I think much more needs to be done to establish programs like the Dangerous Vehicle Abatement Program that finally got underway recently, which allows for the confiscation of vehicles that have received a certain number of speeding tickets and red light tickets if they do not complete a safe driving course. So there's a whole list of options that NYPD and our district attorneys have available to, for example, ask the court to suspend the license of drivers and also use the ability to impound vehicles. So simply taking the vehicles away for the type of drivers that you just talked about who have committed multiple dangerous driving violations. I want to take a step just back and highlight that we have an epidemic of traffic violence in this country and in New York City. And the type of behavior that you talk about, Charlie, is a significant contributor to this epidemic, with nearly 40,000 people killed in traffic crashes annually across the US. Here in New York City, more than 200 people killed every single year, 50,000 people and more are injured in traffic crashes. So this is an epidemic that devastates and rips apart families and communities. And it happens year after year. It affects every New Yorker in some way. NYPD and a broader slate of enforcement measures by the city certainly has a significant role to play. The most important role for the NYPD is to help to change the culture of reckless driving. And I want to highlight two absolutely critical changes that I believe we need from the NYPD. First, NYPD must commit to and essentially follow through on practicing only data-driven and evidence-based enforcement, along with reevaluating all current enforcement under that same practice. And second, we need to establish or reestablish, depending on how you view it, New Yorkers' trust in the NYPD and the fairness and justice of their work. So the first of those two, what's most fundamentally needed from the NYPD is data-driven and evidence-based policing with safety for all road users as the guiding principle. And everything else flows from that, including ensuring equitable policing that is free from bias. It's also a core principle of Vision Zero. And what I mean by data-driven and evidence-based policing is we have a limited amount of enforcement resources. At any time, PD could go to any street in New York City and ticket people left and right for jaywalking. There's including their own colleagues, right? But they don't.
Although they have not, I mean, in fairness, this is not something NYPD has done since the first month of the de Blasio administration. Now, Marco, you and your organization clearly are at the front lines of experiencing and dealing with the impacts of traffic violence. Your organization, Transalt, houses and help create Families for Safe Streets, the courageous family members of that have lost loved ones to killer driving. And so you experience this and feel this all the time. Let me go to Nicole and ask you, Nicole, join us two things. One, same question, how do we get these super dangerous drivers off the streets before they can go on and maim and kill? But second, what, in your opinion, is the root cause or causes of this upsurge in traffic violence that we are seeing across the country and in our own city?
Thank you, Charles. And I want to reiterate as well that I'm honored to be here with yourself and with the chief and with Marco. I think in answer to both of your questions, I'm going to take a step back and do something surprising, which is praise Bill de Blasio. I don't think that I'm known as a big ardent Bill de Blasio fan, and he takes a lot of criticism, most of it justified, from the right, the left, and the center. But if we look to the first 6 years of Vision Zero, the first 6 years of the de Blasio administration, there's a lot of good news there, which is that Vision Zero worked from 2013 to 2019. If you look at the 3-year average of 2017 to 19 compared to the 3-year average that ended in 2013, traffic deaths in New York City fell by 25%, including pedestrian traffic deaths. And that's compared to, as Marco was saying, we have a traffic epidemic in the country. Traffic deaths around the country rose by 11%, and pedestrian deaths were up, partly because of the increased use of SUVs and the increased epidemic of distracted driving. So what New York City was working, or what New York City was doing, was working. What was New York City doing? Continuation of the Bloomberg policies of more bike lanes, more pedestrian plazas. The speed cameras and the red light cameras were working. De Blasio, in his first year, fulfilled a promise to Families for Safe Streets, went to Albany, got the number of cameras significantly increased around schools. speed cameras and red light cameras have certainly cut down on reckless driving. And you can see this, if you ride on, or if you walk along Ocean Parkway, if you ride your bike along Ocean Parkway, people are driving much, much more slowly than 20 years ago when I lived on Ocean Parkway in South Brooklyn, and 2 little girls were killed on a bench right in front of my house and Avenue Y and Ocean Parkway. So all of those things were working. That does not excuse the failures of the past 2 years. But what changed in the past 2 years? We didn't rip out any bike lanes. We didn't rip out any pedestrian plazas. The cameras continued to work during school hours. The things that changed was that for the first few months of the pandemic, the roads were empty. So people could drive a lot more quickly, and they did. And the other thing that changed is we cut back on human policing enforcement. The police department's issuance of moving violations was down by more than half. And so a lot of this reckless driving that the cameras couldn't catch, including the person who allegedly went the wrong way on a one-way street and killed Apolline, and the person who was high on multiple drugs and killed the poor woman in the Bronx a couple of months ago, also illegally going the wrong way down the street. So, we can't fix reckless driving only with automation and street design. At least if we can. We certainly haven't proven it in more than a decade of rethinking the street. So the policing element is certainly important and is still there, but is much, much diminished. And I think you see that in some of these reckless driving deaths that we've seen.
So Chief Royster, you've heard some tough words, including some from me and from Marco, and some praise of NYPD and the de Blasio administration from Nicole. But there has been this terrible slippage in the last 2 years, and even beyond that. It's not as if getting total traffic fatalities down to about 200 or the low 200s a year. We're still at double per population the traffic fatality rate of great cities like Tokyo, London, Paris. So Chief Royster, how do you react to this, and what is your plan or NYPD's plan for getting these most egregiously dangerous drivers off of our streets?
So Charles, thank you very much for inviting me to attend. I am very grateful to be here and to also share and have a conversation about safety for everyone. Safety for everyone that use our public streets. And I think you said it best, is that, there are dangerous drivers that are on our roads. And I think Nicole said it also, they're just not in New York. We saw a pattern of recklessness throughout the country when the pandemic came into play. I do want to say this though, one fatality is too many. And as we look at the data, and the data tells us where we need to go, and in our traffic safety forum, which we rebranded from Traffic Stat, because a life is not a stat, it is a human being. So we've rebranded the Traffic Safety Forum. That forum is a data-driven process where we look at collisions, and collisions that may have fatalities or collisions that may have injuries. And it's important to do that because it will give you the idea of what's going on. But I want to say this, we realized a couple of things when the pandemic came into play. One is that our staffing, as it relates to enforcement, was reassigned to the 77 precincts due to the shortage in manpower, due to the unrest that was taking place in the city. Two, the funding that was directly allocated to Vision Zero was no longer there. And three, it all had to do with the amount of police officers that were coming into the police academy, our new officers. We actually did not put in a class of police officers. So that affected the actual staffing. And then I talked about the funding. You could clearly see, if you wanted to look at the data, the time the funding was taken away and the amount of enforcement that was done, as well as the staffing, they collate all together, and you could see it. What I would like to say is that, yes, Marco, technology is very important. Engineering is very important. And during the Traffic Safety Forum, we bring all our sister agencies together to talk about how we can drive down fatalities. Because we do know engineering, education, and also enforcement, which is very important, are the three components to Vision Zero and driving down fatalities. Why? Because we have to educate people on how do they keep themselves safe, whether you're a pedestrian, a cyclist, or you're on a two-wheel device, which we see now that has really populated our streets. Those are legal and those are illegal, but it's important that we educate the public. Two, we want to make sure that if there's any engineering issues, whether it may be cameras, whether it be street design, that we share that with the Department of Transportation, because they are responsible for making those changes. And three, whatever we do, whether it's education or engineering, you have to follow it up with enforcement, because there are going to be that certain number of people that are just not going to abide by the rules. And we've seen that. We've seen that this year, and we've seen it continuously when we arrest people that are driving without a license, when we arrest people that are recklessly speeding through our streets and our highways during the time of darkness. I just want to say something else. I do believe in engineering. I do believe in technology, but it is not a panacea. The cameras are not a panacea. They're a tool, and they add to us making sure that we make drivers accountable. But here's the challenge in everything that we're saying, and I do agree with Marco and Nicole, and some people may say, what, the police department is agreeing? Yes, I do agree with you, but I also know that there is a challenge. Human behavior is a big factor here. How do you get those people that no matter what, even if they are driving without a license, they continue to do so, they continue to speed? How do you get those individuals to understand that, you know, it's a safety concern and they should correct their behavior? And that's what we're pushing for with the district attorney's office, is that people are driving without a license. People have their license suspended, they can't register their vehicle, they use counterfeit plates, they mark off the actual plate numbers so they can avoid paying the tolls, as well as avoid speed cameras catching them.
Actually, Chief, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me ask you on that license plate defacement in particular, because this is something that I myself never used to see until a couple of years ago. And I see it more and more. It's growing rapidly. It makes me, it undermines the efficacy of automated enforcement. And by the way, Chief, I'm sure you'll agree, or you've seen the same statistics that I've seen, that in districts or intersections or in front of schools where speeding and red light cams have gone in, there have been impressive reductions that are not just transitory, they are pretty much permanent in the amounts of speeding, the amounts of red light running, and the frequency and severity of crashes. But if I can see, as I bike around the city, defaced license plate after defaced license plate, why can't NYPD see them, or is it somebody else's job? And does NYPD have an interest in going after those vehicles on the premise that not only are they evading tolls and maybe evading the red light cameras, but these are presumably the types of drivers and vehicles that we want to interdict in order to protect public safety. So is it NYPD's responsibility in whole or in part to go after those defaced license plate vehicles?
Yes, it is one of our components that we look at. And not only look at that, we enforce. And let me just tell you, you're absolutely right. You see them, I see them. The officers that are assigned to my citywide traffic task force, When they actually are on the corridors to do enforcement, they see them and they actually take action and summons the individual. But here's one of the things that we've been looking at for the last couple of months. This has taken place all over the city, not just in one particular area. And we realized that, and we realized this has to be cross collaboration with our agencies, Port Authority, the troopers, and the sheriff's office, and also TBTA, because what we need to do is come together and figure out a specific strategic way to stop individuals from doing this. And there are some individuals that are doing this because they were informed that this is not against the law. It is against the law. It is against the law. And it's become something that's, I call it, compatible to the counterfeit plates that are coming from Texas, that are coming from New Jersey, Connecticut. This is a black market where people can actually get these plates online. And we've seen that these plates are on vehicles, and they've been on several vehicles, the same plate, which has been towed. So now we're working with our auto crime unit to conduct investigations to determine where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? Because we want to stop it. Because we've seen vehicles involved in shootings, involved in other crimes, and we know it's a black market and people are taking advantage of it.
Yeah. Marco, we've had some go around since you had your first and only opportunity to speak. So feel free to weigh in on any of the points that the chief or Nicole Gelinas have made. You got it.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, so in the spirit of having a lively conversation, I do want to counter what both my co-panelists stated about the pandemic as a cause of the increase in fatalities on our streets, the notion that human policing or the lack of it was the cause. The rise in fatalities on New York City streets started in 2019, where we saw a significant increase, and it continued into 2020. But it started at least a year before COVID came about.
Actually, Marco, I'm sorry, let me just ask you about that. That's certainly true, what you said, with regard to bicycling. We know that 28 bicyclists died biking on the streets of New York City in fatal traffic crashes. TransAlt organized, and I was one of 1,000 participants at the die-in at Washington Square Park in July 2019 as that total was building. But it's my impression, and tell me if I'm wrong, that even despite that, when you add in all types of fatalities to pedestrians, motorcycles, and conventional, motor vehicles, that 2019 was the low point for total New York City traffic fatalities since, statistics began to be gathered a century ago. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, that is wrong. That was 2018, where it plateaued at approximately 205 fatalities. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's that's what I want to push back against. Then you started seeing a significant increase in the latter part of 2018, all of 2019, and
why do you think that was?
Yeah, so that's what I want to get to, is that other countries did not see that rise. We did see increase in speeding in other places in the country during COVID shutdowns, but other countries did not experience that. And de Blasio deserves tremendous credit for committing to Vision Zero and the early years of Vision Zero. Many things were done well, but we said, and many others in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, that the infrastructure changes that are taking place are happening too sporadically. They are not done in a holistic way throughout the city. And when you actually break down the numbers of fatalities in modes between the different years, you see that they actually fluctuate wildly. They just so happen to align that between all of them, that you saw a decrease throughout the years. But that fluctuation, where in one year, one mode, pedestrian or bicyclist, or motorists was low, then the next year was high. That fluctuation in each of those from those years, you didn't see a consistent decrease, was a strong indication that the redesign of a street was wholly inadequate. And it really, what we really only saw was a slight increase in the installation of safe streets measures, street redesign from what we saw under Bloomberg, where those measures really had been tested, they'd been proven, and what we should have seen was a wholesale implementation of that citywide.
Okay, I want to come back to the question of metrics that Chief Royster, I'm going to start with you, that you mentioned in the context of rebranding what had been Traffic Stat, and it's now the weekly, if I understand it correctly, Traffic Safety Forum that you preside over at One Police Plaza.
Yes.
So NYPD, obviously, you count moving violation summonses, you record that, and obviously traffic injuries and fatalities. But why aren't we measuring reckless behaviors that are precursors to crashes, like speeding, the amount of speeding on various streets, or the rate of failure to yield to pedestrians, or the rates of double parked cars in bike lanes? And we've had 8 years of Vision Zero now to develop those kinds of preventive metrics. Where are they?
So I want to first comment on something Marco said. Marco, I know I said that we saw an increase in speeding during the pandemic. I don't think I said it was an increase in fatalities due to the pandemic. So because I can't draw that correlation. I just know that the fatalities occurred, and they occurred in different circumstances also. But we did see an increase in speeding around the city, especially in our highways and on our local streets. So let me just set the stage for you when we're talking about the Traffic Safety Forum. It is a weekly forum that's done with the precincts around the city. We do that based upon the Patrol Borough Bronx, Northern Manhattan, Southern Manhattan. Each one of them will have 1 week, 1 day to come to the forum with our sister agencies and talk about the collisions, fatalities, where they're occurring, what type of plan they have put in place, whether it involves outreach, enforcement, and engineering with a DOT. I will tell you this, that we focus on hazardous violations, which is something you said, Charles. And those hazardous violations include speeding. They include failure to yield the right of way. They include going through red lights. They include improper turn, using a cell phone, texting, disobeying the control devices. These are some of the categories that we look at.
And Chief, let me ask you, you're looking at summonses, or are you
moving violations? Yes.
But let's say if I were to ask you, let's just take Lenox Avenue, north of Central Park and going right through the heart of Harlem. Do we know in 2015 and 2018 and now in 2021, what proportion of vehicles traveling on Lenox Avenue during hours X and Y are disobeying the speed limit? Just to take one example, do we have that information?
No, at the current time, no, we don't. But that's an area, I call that an area where there is a gap. And the reason why I say there's a gap, because we know through moving violations where things are occurring based upon the officers doing that enforcement. It would be great if we had the tool to connect that data from those speed cameras where individuals are actually getting summonses through the Department of Finance from speeding at that area. That's an area that I think that can improve if we had that information. Because
actually, a very quick follow-up. We know that New York City does not have home rule authority to install speed cams or red light cams that will collect fines. But we also know that the city does have the ability, if it chose, to install those same cameras to record violation behavior without being able to collect the fines. Is this something that NYPD would like to do in order to be able to have that metric of whether speeding is getting more prevalent or less?
We would definitely like to be able to leverage technology to tell us where things are occurring, even in addition to us giving enforcement or conducting enforcement. That would be a win-win for us, definitely.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's
Nicole?
those unknowns that we cannot calculate. You know, there are things that are happening on our streets and we're not aware of it at all.
Right. So this sounds, or Nicole, let's come back to you. I saw you perk up at this idea. Does this seem like something that you've been studying traffic safety and traffic violence for a really long time? It's one of the, to me, the more impressive or many impressive things about your journalism. Is this idea of non-fine collecting speed and red light cams something that you think could enhance safety in New York City?
I think it could, although I would wonder if you're going to have them, you might as well issue the fines. But certainly I mean, if, you know, practically speaking, it would be wonderful to have more data, but if you were to just take that extra step, you help to maintain the cameras. But of course, as you said, you can't do that without Albany. But, you know, and I would also say this is something that the city has been doing going back close to 30 years. I mean, even before Bloomberg took office during the Giuliani years, the police department did identify what at the time were dangerous intersections and deploy more moving violation law enforcement officers there, and it worked. I mean, but you know, that type of thing, it is very human intensive, where if you have a corridor that is a highly troubled corridor, rather than collect the data and then send people out to police the data, it just gets you back to the issue of why not just have a fine issuing camera there. I mean, if I were in
We're all
charge
agreed.
of,
Yeah,
yeah,
we're all agreed on that. But
yeah,
there is
if I were
Albany.
in charge of the state legislature, I would have a red light camera at every single intersection, or at least most of them. I mean, we see this every day here in Midtown. A truck speeds up rather than slows down when the light turns red, and it is just luck that ensures that someone isn't killed crossing the street with the walk sign.
Yeah. Well, so here's a question for Marco, but the other panelists will have a chance to respond. In 2019, Marco, when the Livable Streets publication Streets blog ran the plates on some 400 private autos parked in police-only spots at 11 Brooklyn precinct houses, they found that 57% of those parked private cars had gotten tickets for serious moving violations like speeding or red light running, and 2/3 of those had multiple violations. Now, here's what you said in that article in response in 2019. You said, these numbers reveal a law enforcement agency acting with impunity and protecting its own. We need to see leadership from City Hall and the NYPD, you wrote, combating this actual harmful behavior instead of wasting time harassing and hurting immigrant food delivery workers riding bicycles. Marco, would you say the same thing today?
I probably would, because the parking abuse, the placard abuse that we're seeing with police precinct vehicles parked on city streets and illegally on sidewalks, I believe continues to this day. And I think I mentioned also that it happened to the detriment of all New Yorkers. So, you know, that behavior is something that forces pedestrians, wheelchair users out into the street. It causes dangerous conditions. And one of the things I mentioned earlier was that it undermines the trust and faith that New Yorkers have in the police in our city. When with this impunity that happens with these dangerous behavior.
Okay, you know, just because of time, we're coming up to the audience Q&A. I want to pivot to Nicole, because Nicole is in an almost unique position, at least among the people that I know in this field. Very concerned about traffic safety and danger, but also pro-policing and pro-NYPD. So do you agree with Marco that this placard abuse and NYPD private cars or NYPD officers' private cars commandeering sidewalk space in front of precincts, on and on, aside from the red light and speed camera violations that Streetsblog documented, do you think Marco is right that for a lot of New Yorkers, that kind of behavior undermines trust and faith in our police? Or do you think that that's just sort of a niche point of view of, people like Marco and me who read Streetsblog?
Oh, absolutely. This is classic broken windows policing. If someone is going to repeatedly use a fraudulent placard, what other laws is that person going to think about breaking? And the other issue is, if you are like, maybe you don't really think very much about the police, although that doesn't seem common lately. You're neutral, you don't really pay attention to city political issues. But if you're riding your bike down a bike lane, or you're, trying to navigate a narrow sidewalk with a baby carriage, if you see a personal police vehicle near the police precinct, you see the placard up in the windshield, this immediately turns you against the police. I mean, you're going up the bike lane, having to swerve out of the bike lane to go around the city car, or the personal vehicle can see there's no emergency. And so then for the rest of the day, you are inclined to think poorly of the police. So this is kind of like an easy win. Don't send these signals to the public when you certainly don't have to. Now, this is partly the city's fault. Actually, it's entirely the city's fault, because this is an enforcement issue. People do what they can get away with. So if somebody has gotten away with parking illegally on the sidewalk on 54th Street for 15 years of their career, why would that person not do that? It is rational behavior. You are not an evil mastermind person to say, I would rather avoid spending $4,000 a year to park in Manhattan if I can park here on the sidewalk. It is the city's job to enforce this, and the mayor, frankly, has not done it.
So, Chief.
Well, am I gonna get a chance to respond?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so as of today, and since I have been in this position to lead the men and women in the Transportation Bureau, there has been some component.
Uh-oh. I think, have we lost the chief's audio?
She froze on me too, so I don't think it's you.
Charlie, while we're waiting for Chief Royster to come back, I just want to say that it's not just about enforcement, it's also coming up with a policy that actually promotes the type of...
Okay. I think the chief's back. We lost you. Why don't you start wherever you want to start?
So I heard you talking, you didn't hear me, is what I said. There's some components that went into place. One, for the police, don't do it. Don't park on sidewalks, don't park in bike lanes, don't park in bus lanes or any other hazardous violation area where you're not supposed to park. If you do, there are measures that are going to take place. One is that the integrity control officers in each precinct are responding to those locations to do site surveys to determine who's parking in those locations. Two, an internal investigation will be conducted to determine who's parking at that location, and discipline will be administered. That's one of the things that have taken place since I've been here. Number two, in the next couple of days, you will see a policy come down that deals with placards. And I'm not at liberty to discuss it right now, but we've been working behind the scenes on it, and it will actually be publicized in the next couple of days. So as I said before, 43,000 summonses have been written this year to date, for people that have had placards and that were parking inappropriately, abusing those placards. And that's just not the NYPD. That's all city agencies that have placards. DOT, DOE, the police department, the fire department, which are not governed by the city, but all of these agencies are now going to have to be accountable for parking illegally with a placard.
Well, Chief Oyster, thank you. We will look forward to this new policy, probably with some of the hopeful cynicism that the late President Reagan expressed with trust and verify, because we've sort of been to this rodeo before, and all of us, I think, hope that this time will be different. It's time for our audience Q&A, and Peter, I think you're Peter of Roosevelt House. You're the one to mediate it, so take it away.
Yes, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining today. So let's just get right in. A popular question in the chat, can you speak to other modes of transportation that might be considered hazardous, not just drivers who are dangerous, cyclists, scooters, e-bikes, etc., can all pose a threat to pedestrians and other motorists by running red lights and stop signs, going the wrong way on one-way streets, and operating on sidewalks. So to the panel, what can be done to better enforce these traffic laws that pertain to cyclists, scooters, e-bikes, and other modes of transportation?
May I go?
Let's use the sequence, Chief, if you don't mind, that we used at the very beginning. Marco, and then Nicole, and then Chief Royster.
Yes, I think it's important to recognize that everyone who uses our streets need to do so safely, safeguarding the life and limb of everyone else. Bicyclists, e-bike operators absolutely have that responsibility to themselves, amongst themselves, to pedestrians and to others.
Okay, and what should the City of New York and specifically the NYPD do about it? Do you want to see NYPD enforcing red light laws against cyclists, for example? That's a tough question, but you're the guy to answer that.
Yeah, so the point of data-driven and evidence-based policing, especially under Vision Zero, is that with limited resources, we need to focus the type of the enforcement that we do on the behavior and the modes that cause the greatest harm. And that's operating multi-ton vehicles. There is a tendency to equate the danger and the risk and the requirement to abide by laws between cyclists and motorists, but they're vastly different, and they do not pose the same threat. So I believe that different policies should be in place to deter bicyclists, pedestrians from harmful behavior than from people who are operating multi-ton lethal vehicles. And
okay,
also just
let's shake up my order and go directly to Chief Royster and then Nicole. So Chief, how do you feel? And I think Marco was getting at this earlier, the data-driven, his idea on data-driven policing is that cars and trucks are so much more likely to have lethal consequences if they hit a vulnerable road user or pedestrian than bicycles or even e-bikes, that's where the vast preponderance of enforcement should be directed. Do you agree with that?
Data-driven enforcement is only one component that we use to look at fatalities and safety. The other is what we've always done in history, observations, okay? Observations is very important. And I'll say this, yes, vehicles are the most dangerous, but when it comes to enforcing the law, whether it's cyclists or these two-wheel devices, it's under the umbrella of safety. I don't want to see a cyclist go through the red light and get struck by a vehicle. That's something that we have to address also. Now, let me just say this, e-bikes since last year have become legal. The ones that are used for deliveries, they are legal. They can ride in the actual bike lanes, but they have to ride safely also. they have to stay off our sidewalks. And they have to make sure that they are not going through red lights. Let me just say another thing is that the two-wheel devices that are populating our streets, that are illegal, that are riding in the bike lane, we are seizing them. Somewhat people would call them scooters, right? We are seizing them. Not only are we seizing them because they're not street legal, they can't be written on the street, but we're also going to the point of sale now.
So Chief, you're referring, just for clarification, because the nomenclature is terrible. You're not referring to the sort of the stand-up scooter things. You're really referring to mopeds. Is that right?
Right. Those, the two-wheel, I call them two-wheel devices, yes. And I will, for education, there is a flyer that we have that identifies what's legal and what's not legal. I think some people think the devices where hoverboards, they're not legal to ride in the street, you know, and you see them a lot. It's a safety concern. But let me get back to my point of sale. The point of sale is some of these establishments all over the city are selling these two-wheel devices. They're mopeds. They're under 100 pounds. They cannot be registered by DMV, and people are actually riding them in the street. And so it's not enough for us to take them from the person that has it or where it's parked. We're going to the establishments that's selling them. And then we're additionally giving them a cease and desist letter so that they will be put on notice that they're selling illegal products in their store.
Okay.
You know, it has to be a layer effect here.
Right. Nicole, a quick response from you, and then we want to go to another question.
Yeah, there's no question on Marco's point that a large multi-ton vehicle able to go 40 miles an hour is much more dangerous than a smaller two-wheel vehicle that can go 25 or a little bit faster than that. I think all good physicists would agree. And so that is where the bulk of the enforcement should lie, with reckless car and truck drivers. But just as I said, the police hurt their own cause with personal vehicles parking on the sidewalk, the bicycle movement hurts its own cause in not acknowledging that the mass proliferation of non-pedal e-bikes and mopeds being used by gig worker delivery workers who are under severe economic pressure to get the food miles away when it's still reasonably hot have added a great deal of chaos to the streets over the past year and a half. I mean, you do add an extra cognitive load on the pedestrian in having to look for a fast-moving non-pedal e-bike, often coming the wrong way down the bike lane or the road, or pedaling on the sidewalk. And it tends to be more elderly pedestrians who may have a harder time looking for cars and trucks, and now they also have to look for this new element. And as we've seen, you remember, Charlie, back in the early 80s, 3 older women in just the course of a few weeks were killed by bike messengers, which caused bike backlash at the time. We risk a similar thing if we don't start to acknowledge that you cannot have quickly moving, non-pedal, motorized two-wheel vehicles going all different directions and going on the sidewalk. We've already had 2 pedestrians killed, again, both of them women, the actress on the Upper West Side and the woman at Columbus Circle, by two-wheeled vehicles going the wrong way. So if we continue to ignore this, it harms the cause of people wanting to see bicycles on the streets, and it contributes to the
yeah.
preventable carnage.
Right. Fair points. Just for clarification, those 2 terrible fatalities you mentioned from earlier this year or last year, those were mopeds.
Well,
Right.
again, that's a problem with the nomenclature
Yes,
and
yes.
what is legal and what is not
Yeah.
legal and what people don't know. But again, we also have to think about the 18 e-bike delivery people who have been killed over the COVID period. Is this a fair business model? Or is this just another example of Uber and Lyft 10 years ago taking control of the streets, where we are putting people, very vulnerable people, in danger in service of apps improving their profits?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Important questions. We could spend an entire forum and more just on this. And I know there are people who wish that we had or would, but let's go to another question, please, Peter.
Sure thing. Jeff Blum asks, is there national or international data about the rise of speeding and other antisocial driving practices since the beginning of the pandemic? Are there strategies in use elsewhere that New York City might learn from?
Chief, you want to start?
Interesting.
Answers?
We're always looking at other cities and other countries, but I will say this, I mean, a lot of it plays to engineering. The cameras, technology is a tool, but a lot of it plays to engineering, because what engineering will do is slow down that motorist, whether it's a speed bump or whether it's a actual light or any type of markings, or just closing down that particular street and making it just open to pedestrians. That's what we look to do, is just slow down that vehicle.
So Chief Royster, let me ask a follow-up to you. During the second Mike Bloomberg term, when he sort of turned toward trying to green the streets and make them not just safer, but also more available for other forms of transportation, especially walking and biking, part of what kicked that off was when his transportation commissioner and city planning commissioner went to some of the great European cities, especially Amsterdam and Copenhagen, and were taken around by their counterparts there and got to see how street design worked, how culture worked, and what ensued from that, and I know not everybody agrees with this, but I'm a huge fan, were things like public plazas and a new type of bike lane, parking protected bike lanes of other sorts that sort of kicked off the revolution that enabled the big increase in cycling, and on and on, basically good things. So my question is, would there be interest on your part in you and some of your top NYPD transportation associates and officials in going to Paris and London and Tokyo and Amsterdam and so forth, meeting with your counterparts there and observing best practices that you might bring back to New York?
Charles, I would love to go to Paris and Tokyo.
Let's go.
But you're absolutely right. It's always very good to get a global perspective of what's going on around the world that can be beneficial in our city, the greatest city in the world, I say, and also to have a law enforcement perspective. So, I mean, that would be definitely up to the police commissioner and the mayor, but that is something to explore, yes.
Okay, we'll back you up if we really will. Let's go straight to another question, which might unfortunately be the last. Peter?
Sure. Well, on the last one, I guess we should choose a good one. Keeping in line, I guess, with this sort of idea, Matt asked, what can New York City learn from other countries and cities that have successfully implemented similar programs to Vision Zero? But he specifically wants to know what types of engineering challenges can be overcome as we look to modernize our infrastructure in the next 10 years.
Marco, that seems tailor-made for you.
Okay, I'm not sure it's the exact part of the question about overcoming the engineering challenges, but it's clear that if we are to take the best from other countries that have far lower traffic fatality rates than the US and New York City, we would vastly increase our implementation of street redesigns, of protected bike lanes, of protected intersections for pedestrians, narrow our vehicle travel lanes to cause people to drive more slowly, get more automated enforcement. And the one thing that is unique about the US Vision Zero model is an over-reliance on enforcement. You do not see that heavier reliance on enforcement in the places where streets are the safest. You do see policing and enforcement, but the scale is tipped in the opposite direction with in redesigns of the streets and limits on how fast cars can go as the overwhelming street and traffic safety measures.
Nicole?
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. We need much more aggressive street engineering, revive the idea that de Blasio killed to cut off most passenger car traffic on Fifth Avenue in Midtown, for example. That should be almost entirely a bike and bus lane, and of course pedestrian lanes as well. And I would also just point out that we actually decreased the number of moving violations tickets starting in 2019. So I think Marco is correct that we started to see some of these problems before the pandemic, but we also started to see the decline in moving violations. So engineering can do a lot, but it is never going to do everything, and is certainly not going to do everything anytime soon.
Well, Roosevelt House events conclude with each panelist taking 1 minute to provide a top-of-mind policy recommendation. And since we're topical as well as historical, I'm going to frame it this way. You have 1 minute with incoming Police Commissioner Sewell. And Chief Royster, hopefully you'll have an hour, but the rest of us might get 1 minute in our dreams. You know her top priority is preventing violent crimes. But you also know, as Bill Bratton said in late 2013, just before the last incoming mayor named him his police commissioner, that traffic fatalities too are violent, and most of them are crimes as well. So in 60 seconds, what is your message about transportation, streets, and safety to the new Commissioner Sewell? We'll start with Nicole Gelinas.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, congratulations to this historic choice of police commissioner in Commissioner-to-be Sewell. I would say, in order for police officers to have more day-to-day understanding of what the average pedestrian or what the average bicyclist faces from the danger of street traffic, have more police on bicycles. And I don't mean in a very large group of police and bicycles, but have regular, two-person bicycle patrols in addition to the car patrols. In also when give the police officers more discretion in using common sense. So am I going to ticket the bicyclist who was going the right way because he doesn't have a bell as a gotcha ticket? Or am I going to ticket the non-pedal e-cyclist going the wrong way on a sidewalk and yelling at the pedestrians who get in his way? Which of these people is creating a greater danger to the public? So, common sense, although I guess not everyone's common sense is the same, goes a long way.
Okay, so two-person bike patrols, make them common or ubiquitous and common sense by officers on the beat. Marco, what do you say? What would you say to the incoming police commissioner?
Also, congratulations. I'm very happy to see the commissioner that we are now getting. I would echo first what Nicole mentioned about getting more cops on bikes. I believe that's also part of the policy of that is needed to address the police precinct parking problems of getting more officers to commute by other means than car. So you change the underlying conditions. But I would say just one policy change would be that we need to vastly expand the number of traffic enforcement agents, TEAs, that we have that Chief Royster oversees, to increase the number of them and the type of violations that they enforce. TEAs, many of them are trained to issue moving violations, certain types of criminal summonses. They are currently not doing so because of NYPD policy. We should utilize that. And they should replace much of the armed policing that occurs where that can be done, specifically in the precinct traffic policing, to replace that armed policing.
Chief Royster, what you would tell the new police commissioner or anything else that you want to tell our audience? Because what you would say to the commissioner should, to some extent, is going to be
I would
confidential.
say to my new boss, that's fine. Well, first of all, I would say to her, it is refreshing. Congratulations on the historical appointment. It's the greatest thing to lead the men and women in the New York City Police Department. And I wholeheartedly support all of your efforts. That's number one. Number two, I would say that traffic safety is public safety. And looking at traffic safety, not as one silo, but connected to the crime that we have in New York, and being a voice at the table to make sure legislators understand what we need in New York City to make sure that we are going after the most violent people that are driving these vehicles and actually causing these fatalities.
Boy, that sounds like music to Nicole Gelinas' ears, right? The connection between violence in driving and violence in other miscreant behavior. Well, we're going to end on time. I want to thank our audience for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. I want to thank our wonderful panelists, Marco Connor Diacqua, Nicole Gelinas, and especially Chief Royster. We are so honored by your presence again at this tumultuous time. Thank you so much for being available, for being willing to be on the receiving end of some tough questions, and for gracing us with your wisdom. Thank you. Thank all of our panelists, and everybody be safe, be active, be involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you all. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday.
Same to you, Chief. And same to you, Charles and Nicole.